Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new lecture of the Middle East Institute. It's exactly 5 p.m. in Singapore. I will be your host, Jean-Luc Saman, from the Middle East Institute for the next hour and a half. Today, we will be discussing Iran and Arab relations, and we thought this was a timely topic after a first lecture last week that discussed the situation of great power competition in the Middle East. And as we said last week, the great power competition in the Middle East is a two-way street, meaning that it's not only great powers trying to shape the balance in the Middle East. We will see this week in particular that the Middle East powers also have a say and have their own agency. To discuss that, we will be looking more specifically at Iran, Iran's foreign policy, and in particular, Iran's policy towards the Arab world. This is a topic that has evolved greatly in the last months. Not so long ago, we used to talk about the Cold War between Iran and the Arab Gulf states. And we've seen in the last month, and in particular after the spectacular announcement by China of a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that all the previous narratives, all the previous talks about Iran-Arab relations have been challenged in a way. So to discuss these topics, we'll have here two great speakers. We'll have Dr. Jacopo Scitta, who's joining us and who's a policy fellow at the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation. Dr. Scitta focuses on China's relations with the countries of the Middle East and Central Asia, and in particular, Iran. His research traces the security, economic, and social dynamics generated by China's growing presence in the region. He obtained his doctorate last year in October 2022 from Durham University in the UK, and his thesis in particular was titled Role Theory and China's Relations with Iran, All-Weather Friends on Beijing's Term. He will be preceded actually by my colleague Asif Shuja, who's a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute, where he focuses on Iran, Iran's domestic politics, Iranian nuclear issue, as well as Iran's foreign policy. Previous to his position at the Middle East Institute in Singapore, Dr. Shuja was associated with the International Center for Strategic Studies in Abu Dhabi as a non-resident fellow, and his other research affiliations include the Indian Council of World Affairs, where he worked as a research fellow, and the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. Dr. Shuja obtained his PhD on Iran's political power struggle from the Center for West Asian Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. And let me mention that he's the author of the book India-Iran Relations Under the Shadow of the Iranian Nuclear Issue. Now, without further ado, I will leave the floor right away to Dr. Shuja for the first part of the discussion. And following the initial presentation, we will have a Q&A. Let me remind our audience that if you want already to ask questions, you can write them in the chat box, send them to MEI event, and we will make sure to ask the questions to the speakers. Thank you. And Asif, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Luc, for your kind introduction. And I hope I'm audible, right? Okay. So let me just share the slide, because this is the presentation that both Jacopo Scitta and I will be sharing. So let me just share the slide. Today's lecture is Iran-Arab relations from rivalry to rapprochement. So the picture that we are seeing here is actually what has been making the news. China mediated rapprochement that has come between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So we are going to cover this entire topic. We have basically broken this whole issue into two parts, which will eventually be our learning objectives. The first is the rivalry part, where we will be looking at Iran-Saudi rivalry which we will be contextualizing in Iran's regional outreach dynamics. So what is exactly Iran's regional role? There we shall be looking at the rivalry part. And we will see again if there are differences which can be reconcilable, or if there are differences which can never be resolved. So this whole part I will be dealing with, and my colleague here, Dr. Sheeta, will be looking at the rapprochement part, that is the China's brokered Iran-Saudi agreement, and he will be also looking at its implications to the regional architecture, and will be making a comparison between the US brokered Abraham Accord. So when we look at Iran's regional role and the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the first concept that is there in our mind is the leadership of the Islamic world. So it is that contest in which the two powers are engrossed. But we have to look at Saudi Arabia as the legitimate center of Islam, because it is there where the Islam was born. It is there where physically, even till this day, two holy mosques are residing. On this picture, we can see Makkah and Medina, the two holy mosques, where these two holy mosques are based. So this is where the whole Islamic world goes for the pilgrimage. So this gives Saudi Arabia a proper legitimacy to be the claimant of the Islamic world. So that was kind of a moral dynamics that Saudi Arabia was enjoying as the leader of the Islamic world. And since Middle East primarily being the Muslim society, it was having a very legitimate claim to the whole of the region as far as this religious factor was concerned. So that was one status that Saudi Arabia was enjoying. And then we see that apart from this status, in the security dynamics, this this Saudi Arabia and United States came into agreement in 1945. This is a picture which is quite clearly depicts their relationship, which started on 14th of February 1945. And the relationship that was built with this particular agreement, where the King of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud, and President Roosevelt of United States, they had met, and this is where their relationship started, which went until present time. It is there, and it is now that we have been evaluating whether this relationship is impacted by certain factors or not. So this is another factor which has actually given Saudi Arabia a very strong hold in the region in terms of military and security dynamics. Now we see that the challenge to that status of Saudi Arabia was given in 1979 through the revolution that happened in Iran. So Saudi Arabia at one place in the moral spectrum in terms of Islam, in the security spectrum in terms of its relationship with the United States, was enjoying a power status. Now in 1979, a revolution happens where a person called Ayatollah Khomeini becomes the leader of the masses, who are all again Muslims. Of course, they are Shia Muslims, but again, they are Muslims. So on our left, we can see the popularity that Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini enjoyed. This picture on our left is, in fact, before the revolution, and before the picture on our right, we can see that Ayatollah Khomeini is flying from France to Iran. So the picture that is depicted on left, it is there to depict that even when Ayatollah Khomeini is not there in Tehran, he has this kind of popularity. So once he landed in Iran, he became the leader of the entire population, and now he charted on a journey which, as you will see, that gave Saudi Arabia a kind of a tough fight in terms of its regional powerhood. And this is where the rivalry came. So as soon as that happened, there was a lot of ripples within the region and globally also. So the one immediate impact of that revolution was that the geopolitics unfolded in a particular way, where Iran and Iraq what happened. That was between 1980 and 88. So that is one thing where Iran's relationship with other powers could be seen. But since we are specifically focusing here on how Iran and Saudi Arabia's relationship was impacted by certain key events of history. So here we see that Iran-Iraq war, Saudi Arabia had sided with Iraq. So that was one issue which actually was ingrained in the psyche of Iranians. And on the screen on the left, we can see that it's the Iranian soldier which has been wearing a gas mask. So Iranians always talk about the chemical weapons that was used by Saddam Hussein. And on our right, we see that Saddam Hussein is actually shaking hands with Donald Rumsfeld, who was there, the US envoy to Iraq. So this is actually to depict the relationship between United States and Iraq at one hand, and Iran and Saudi Arabia at other hand. So this was another issue where Saudi Arabia siding with Iraq has become an issue in the minds of Iranian, because Iran-Iraq war had a very big impact on Iranian society or Iranian economy, and it is still trying to recover. So this is another key event which has actually become a very important issue in their relationship and a major factor for rivalry. So during this war, since Saudi Arabia was a monarchy and Iran had got a leadership which was not a monarchy, which was not hereditary, it was sort of popular leader which was ruling. And in the GCC, all 6 countries were having a monarch. So it created some kind of unnerving sentiments among these powers. So they tried to find a formula where they could save themselves if there is kind of export of that revolution which Ayatollah Khomeini had brought out in Iran. So they came out with a formula which is called GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council. And this is the picture where on 25th of May 1981, their first summit had happened. So this became, in a way, a sort of block in order to check Iran. Of course, during their communique, they did not explicitly mention Iran, but the timing of this organization actually tells us that it was actually the product of Iran emerging as a power and not a monarchy, unlike the other 6 countries. So this became another issue and sort of, deterrence by these 6 monarchs. So this is actually was going in a long way in terms of their relationship. Now, the major contention between Iran and Saudi Arabia that came in 2002, on 14th of August to be specific, this particular photograph actually depicts the start of this nuclear genie, which we have been discussing even to this day. So this was Ali Raza Jafarzadeh, who actually revealed sort of clandestine nature of Iranian program on 14th of August 2002. Before that, Iran was having a civil nuclear program, but if there is any military dimension of it, or if there are some clandestine which are hidden from NPT or IAEA, from IAEA inspectors, this was revealed to the world for the first time on this day by this man who is actually a member of NCRI, which is actually a dissident group of Iran. So this became a major bone of contention between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And even to this day, they have been struggling with how to deal with this problem. And apart from Iran's nuclear program, we know that Iran has certain other armaments. These days, there's a lot of talk about Iran's drones. We know about Iran's missiles. We know about Iran's parallel 2 types of different military. So in terms of all these power parameters, Iran is very powerful. So the only way through which Saudi Arabia can give Iran fight, because intrinsically, if we see the worth of Saudi Arabia's military, we see that there is absolutely no comparison. So where does Saudi Arabia derive its strength? It derives its strength from its alliance with United States. That is why Saudi Arabia's relationship with United States becomes crucial as in its fight with Iran. Now, we see another wave of disturbances that came in the Middle East was in the form of Arab Spring. So what was this Arab Spring? Was a kind of a popular movement to bring out sort of representative government. You name it as you like, call it democracy, call it some other form of government, but they were intrinsically against the hereditary monarchical form of government. So of course, this kind of setup, this kind of movement will create ripples if there are monarchies. So and since there was kind of rivalry already in place between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So it is not very difficult to see that Iran would have liked to capitalize on these sentiments. So this was majorly another major issue, which was really a big problem. There is another, Bahrain uprising is actually part of Arab Spring. It happened all across Middle East. We know about Egypt. We know about many other countries like Libya. So this is a very important Bahrain because it is very close to Saudi Arabia, and of course it is part of GCC. So and it has sizable Shia majority. So this was one major issue where Saudi Arabia and Iran relationship was impacted. And now, finally, the other major issue that was Yemen war. Because see, Yemen is a neighbor of Saudi Arabia. It's actually the backyard of Saudi Arabia. And Iran is not a land neighbor of Yemen. So, of course, Iran has been fighting with Saudi Arabia in sort of proxy war. And whatever, dynamics that was created because of the Arab Spring in Yemen, that was being capitalized by Iran. So here we see that the ravages of Yemen war on the left, and because Iran has been officially denying that it has been supporting the rival group Houthi, So, but here in the picture, you see that Ayatollah Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran, is talking with the representative of Houthi rebels. So, of course, there's kind of tacit understanding between these two. But of course, officially, they are not saying that they are supporting. So this is one Yemen conflict that became the most important current issue between these two countries. And then there's one more, issue, which was the execution of al-Nimr in Saudi Arabia in 2016, when this was a Shia cleric who was executed. Since Iran says that, and of course, the sizable majority of Iran is Shia, so there was a large repercussions on Iranian society. So here we see the procession that was happening in support of Nimr, who was executed by Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, when this cleric was executed, the Saudi embassy in Iran was set on fire, and then the two countries snapped their diplomatic ties. So that was actually kind of a culminating point of all these rivalries, that they snapped ties, and now there was no diplomatic relationship. So this is one major turning point. Now we see that Saudi Arabia and Iran are in sort of proxy fight, and we have said that Saudi Arabia derives its strength from United States, its alliance with the United States, and we see there's another discussion that why United States has been receding from Middle East. So in this context, this Afaq attack in 2019, September 2019, this becomes important because it is here where a major oil facility of Saudi Arabia was attacked by Houthi rebels, which we have seen that has got traffic support from Iran. So indirectly, it is a fight between Iran and Saudi Arabia, of course, a proxy war. But Saudi Arabia was directly impacted, and since it was directly impacted, it was expecting some kind of action from the side of United States, which did not come. So now this is one issue which is there on the Saudi's mind, and of course, as Dr. Yokoshita will explain how this is important in terms of what happened in terms of rapprochement. Now, if we look at this map of Iran and Saudi Arabia, there's just one point I need to highlight here, is that Iran and Saudi Arabia do not share land border, right? So why is it important? Because when two countries in international relations do not share land border, still they are in war. That actually shows that they are sort of regional power, right? And if they are regional power, then what is the best way for them to have war with each other? It is through proxies. And we have seen that in the theater of Yemen, they have actually gone into the war. So actually, there is nothing that can go worse. So they have really reached to the tipping point, and this is important to be highlighted, that after reaching this tipping point, Saudi Arabia has seen that United States has not come out actively in a combat mode to take him to get him out of this quagmire. So maybe that is why, you know, this point of rivalry is important when we are trying to understand why there is rapprochement between the two countries. So we have seen that there are a lot of, you know, issues or key events or, you know, incidences of history where we see the rivalry. But of course, there are some brief period of cooperation. To be precise, these are two, you know, general agreements between these two countries. One is economic in 1998, the other is security. But if you look at it, 1998 and 2001, in fact, April 17, 2001, you see that in 2002, the Iranian nuclear genie had come up. So despite all those problems, they were trying to have sort of, you know, a relationship. They were trying to build some sort of relationship, but that was all trumped by by the Iranian nuclear program. So after which things actually gotten worse. So because of, you know, all these key events since they were facing, and then as I said, the dynamics of it, that they have really reached tipping point. So there has to be some compulsion behind them in the minds of the two leaders, which actually brought them closer for this trilateral agreement. So this is actually the picture of that trilateral statement, you know, which is there, which actually will be explained by my colleague, Dr. Sheeta, as to why exactly this rapprochement happened. I have just given the background of the two countries' relationship, highlighting the key points on which their rivalries are there. So I will just stop, and these are some image attributions for reference. So thank you so much, and now I'll hand over to Dr. Sheeta, please.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Thank you so much, Asif, for your introduction, which perfectly offered us the broader context of the March 10 agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And let me say thank you to Jean-Loup for you know, moderating this. We haven't it's the first time I think we meet, although virtually, but we have interacted quite a lot, and I look forward to read your latest book, which looks promising. And thank you so much for the Middle East Institute for having me. It's a great pleasure. It's not the first time I work with the Middle East Institute. I know a lot of people there, so for me it's fantastic to join this conversation, and I see it as a pretty big crowd, so that's even better. So yeah, as my colleague Asif has introduced, you know, my sort of contribution to this will be look more specifically at the recent what I call de-escalation agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was brokered by China, which probably is the most interesting and to an extent surprising aspect of this agreement. Because as Asif was saying at the end of his presentation, it's quite clear that things and the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran had reached sort of a tipping point, a point where, you know, some sort of agreement, some sort of de-escalation was supposed to happen in a way or another. But the very fact that China was able to sort of put his diplomatic hat over that agreement is certainly significant, and I think it should be investigated and discussed a lot. And the more time it passes, the clearer is the picture of what China has done, what China was aiming, and why regional countries wanted China on board. So, but yeah, let me start from, you know, sort of where Asif already touched. So I think, you know, the casus belli, if you want to say like that, or what did not turn into a casus belli for this sort of a long-term process of de-escalation or attempt to create a de-escalation momentum between Saudi Arabia and Iran was the Houthis/Iran attack on Saudi oil facilities. You know, especially since the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, we have seen a consistent escalation by Iran and its proxies in the Gulf as a sort of response to the imposition of US secondary sanction, the maximum pressure campaign. And of course, although we can argue how much Iran controls the Houthi and so on, but it's quite clear that there's been an escalation trend in the region with attacks to oil tankers, with attack to oil facilities, and definitely the September 2018 attacks have been the most tragic and the most revealing of Iran's ability to hit where it hurts the most in Saudi Arabia. So it's oil output capacity. So, and as Asif was saying, and I think you guys have discussed quite a lot in the previous lecture, the key point there was, yes, the attack, but also the lack of US response to such a deep and strong and dangerous move by Iran. Saudi Arabia were definitely unhappy. And one thing it's worth, I think, remember when we think about this is that at that time, the US president was not Joe Biden, but was Donald Trump. So someone that from Saudi Arabia perspective, but generally speaking from the Gulf perspective, was a friendly president, was much more friendly than Biden, was much more accommodating, was much more open to, sell arms, planes and stuff to sort of give green lights to Gulf countries. And I think this in the sort of the Saudi mindset really the fact that Trump did not came at Saudi rescue as they expected sort of changed Saudi mindset about this. And the response, interestingly enough, was to try to establish a regional dialogue. So this is something we are not very much keen and used, let's say, used to see in the Middle East in general and in the Gulf. So usually we always seen external powers trying to impose their will or try to move regional processes and lead regional processes. With the failure of the United States to respond as Saudi Arabia hoped to Iran's attack, the news was that a difficult process of regional dialogue emerged. And this was led by Iraq and Oman, mostly. It happened through various meetings between several regional countries, including Iran and Saudi Arabia. So since 2021, since August 2021 to March 2023, we had this sort of new, interesting, usually promising, but also often, delusional regional dialogue. But this was sort of the context that preceded China's getting on board and brokering the deal. How this happened? So interestingly enough, in December 2022, Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia in what was a sort of the greatest celebration of the honeymoon that the Arab world and China are living these days. Xi Jinping was welcomed with the greatest honor in Saudi Arabia. There were 3 days of meeting at 3 levels, one with Saudi Arabia, one with the GCC, and one with the Arab League. So this was really a celebration of the China-Arab relations. And it was also a huge blow to Iran because China signed a joint declaration with the GCC countries in which, in the declaration, the UAE claimed 3 islands in the Persian Gulf that are under the Iranian control since 1971. And China signed that declaration, sort of, putting a lot of pressure on the Raisi administration, which was furious about China betraying and Iran's sovereignty. And this, for me myself, that I'm a watcher of this things. This was strange. This was a massive blow. I thought, well, China is for once abandoning a sort of balanced policy between the Arab world and Iran and deciding with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with the GCC. But then, surprisingly enough, as a sort of to amend what happened, Ibrahim Raisi, so the Iranian president, was invited to visit China in February 2023. Again, the visit was a celebration of Sino-Iranian relations. Raisi was the first president to embark on an official visit to China after 20 years. And so, you know, it seems that, okay, China is back at balancing between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China is carefully showing the world that it doesn't want to leave Iran in the hands of the United States, that Iran is a friend, and so on. The interesting thing is that despite this visit happened a month before the agreement was between Iran and Saudi Arabia was announced in Beijing, there were no rumors about this being discussed. And usually, you know, when you have this sort of visit and you have leaks, you have, you know, speculation about all this stuff, but there was complete silence. And we were all, you know, surprised, myself in premise, but I think, you know, most of the server was surprised by the announcement on March 10 of this trilateral agreement between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China. When China put itself as a mediator of the agreement, China was a guarantor somehow of the agreement, or at least it tried to put itself as sort of the country that guarantees the agreement. When we knew about the agreement, when the news broke, a lot of us looked back at what happened, and the first news and details came out, and it seems that apparently, as far as we know, was Saudi Arabia and was MBS, so this guy that asked Xi Jinping to mediate, and Raisi was invited to Beijing to you know, to get the message from MBS conveyed, and so China was an active player in this agreement, but what we have to think about and really start to you know, reflect a bit today is what was the context of this agreement? What was the broader context of this agreement? Why? What were the objectives that Saudi Arabia and Iran had in this agreement? And I think Asif give you a sort of a broader perspective on this, but also how does this Chinese role fit in this? Is this something new? Are we witnessing a change in the geopolitical landscape of the region, or is just, you know, China continuing its strategy and taking advantage of an occasion? Let me try to answer this question. So first of all, I think, you know, one thing we have not to forget is that, yes, the regional context of this agreement is, of course, Iran, US, Saudi Arabia tension in the region, which we have described in great detail before. But there's a broader context, which is the one of Russia war in Ukraine. Sort of Russia war in Ukraine, the invasion, really changed the geopolitical landscape. And I think China, at some point in that context, was and still is looking to define its new place in this sort of this new global geopolitical reality. And in my opinion, this agreement for China was a good chance to send a message to the world, and in particular to the global South. And that message, which is consistent, I'd say, with, for example, with China global strategy and so on, was that, hey, you know, everyone, and especially the United States and Europe, are all focused on Ukraine and Russia war in Ukraine. But there are a lot of conflicts in the world, and this is exactly the words that Wang He, that guy in the middle of the picture, said after signing the agreement with Saudi Arabia and Iran. He said, look, the fact that we mediated this agreement and that we resolved a long-term conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a testify that China cares about the global south, cares about conflicts that no one cares anymore, because everyone in the West is focused on Ukraine and Russia. But there are a lot of conflicts, and China is there to help. China is willing to help. China is willing to mediate. And so this was a good occasion for China to put in practice a message they were crafting in the context of the war in Ukraine. But for China, this was also, interestingly enough, a low-cost activity. And I'm saying that because, as we were saying, the reconciliation, the de-escalation process was not initiated by China. It was initiated by regional countries. So China came at the end of the process, at the point where, as I was saying before, where both Saudi Arabia and Iran reached the point where an agreement was due. And so China was invited by Iran and Saudi Arabia because it was a trusted partner, because from a Saudi perspective, China is the only great power that has some influence on Iran. But China came there at the point where the terms of the agreement were already on the table. So this was a sort of a low-cost intervention. It was a sort of, China had probably assurance that the agreement was going to be signed, that this was not a sort of a, impossible achievement. There was something that was possible, that was close to be. And so, therefore, this is not inconsistent with China global regional strategy. You know, when we talk about China, and I'm sure you have heard a lot about this, when you talk about China regional strategy in the Middle East, we'll focus on, look at China as a sort of economic and financial player in the region. We also consider China a diplomatic actor that has a little history of actively engaging in diplomacy with the region, but also we consider China not a security player in the region. So if we have to sort of make a free level description of China role in the region, of China's strategy in the Middle East, we see economic first, economic and financial interaction first, diplomacy second, and security in the last spot. So again, I think contrary to what many people have described and said, China mediating this agreement is entirely consistent with its strategy. Again, because China just took advantage of a process, of a regional process that was already in play. So from a diplomatic perspective, this was a great win. But again, and I know I'm repeating this, but I think it's a key point here. This was a low-cost move, low-risk, low-cost move for China, and also this was consistent with China's broader objective of maintaining and building economic relations with the region. If you think about what I defined as the casus belli that led Iran and Saudi Arabia to start talking, so the attack to Saudi oil facilities, you immediately realize that for China, the Persian Gulf is absolutely critical for its energy security. And it's true that for Iran would be unlikely to attack Chinese tankers or oil going to China, because China is Iran's only buyer of oil, is Iran's economic lifeline. But at the same time, when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia and cut off half of Saudi Arabia oil production for several days, China immediately, were in the Chinese mindset, the idea that, okay, the situation can really escalate and put our energy security at risk was there. And so it's quite clear that from a Chinese economic and financial perspective, ensuring a minimum degree of stability in the region is a primary goal. So if you look at this broader picture, yes, we did not expect China mediating this, but at the same time, it's not surprising. It's not entirely surprising, and it's not inconsistent with what China has done so far. So let me get to the sort of last two questions. So and then of course we will have a lot of time for Q&A, which I think it will be the most interesting part of this. With China mediating this agreement, are we sort of witnessing a new Chinese led security, or in general more broadly architecture, emerging in the Persian Gulf? Personally, my answer is no. And my answer is no, because China's still not interested in becoming sort of, the peace broker of the region, is not interested in being the diplomatic leader of the region. I don't think China has the means and will of becoming a security provider. China is very happy that the United States remain in the region and remaining the one that provides to Saudi Arabia, UAE, this sort of security umbrella. And so I really struggle to see China, changing this. And also, I think regional countries, and in that case, I'm specifically talking about Arab countries in the region, not Iran, of course, are not interested in pushing the United States out of the region and substitute the United States with China, because they know that China is not ready, is not willing, has not the means to substitute the United States. But what we are seeing is that China is an increasingly crucial in regional dynamics. China is crucial for Iran as a economic lifeline provider. As I put in this graph, China is buying tons of oil from Iran, and this is a very interesting dynamic. And I'm happy to discuss this further in the Q&A. But also, regional countries are increasingly interested in sort of joining this emerging Eurasian Chinese-led order. And we are seeing this in this growing interest in regional interest in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance. Or we had news this morning that Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE will probably join the BRICS. So the region is increasingly looking at China with interest, and with the idea of a Chinese Eurasian order emerging with interest, and China's of course interested in feeding this narrative and increasing its footprint in the region. So lastly, and I'll stop there because I probably have talked too much. It's interesting because when we think about an Iran-Saudi Arabia rapprochement, we naturally think about the Abraham Accords. So the rapprochement or the peace agreement between several Arab countries and Israel. Now, I think, when I was thinking about what are the relationship between these two processes that we are witnessing, I think, first of all, they are not excluding each other. I think this is very important. Arab countries, and especially Arab Gulf countries, are very interested in consolidating relationship with Israel, but are also at the same time interested in building or restoring relations with Iran and stabilizing the de-escalation process with Iran. So for Arab countries, and again, we are back to the idea that we mentioned before of agency, these two processes are not mutually exclusive. Now, they're not competing either, but they're not coordinating at this point, and the region is obvious. There's no connection right now, no possibility of de-escalation between Israel and Iran at the current state of things. But what is certainly interesting is that the region is moving fast. The region is moving fast. Regional countries are interested in exerting the agency, are increasingly interested in playing this sort of a multi-aligned foreign policy, which is a key trend that is emerging in the Gulf. And so if I have to give you what for me are the two main differences between the Abraham Accords and the Beijing Agreement, let's call it like that. First of all, is a matter of context. So what was behind Iran and Saudi Arabia / Arab war tension was, as we defined it before, a sort of Cold War with very hot spots. If you allow me to use this linguistic game, while between Israel and the Arab Gulf countries, I think we had a sort of a cold peace. The Abraham Accords somehow made official what was going on for a while. Relationship between, for example, the UAE and Israel were going on long before the Abraham Accords. So there was a cold peace somehow. So this is the first difference. And the second difference, which I think, again, is important to bear in mind, is that, yes, this is all part of emerging regional dynamics. But if we look at the process, again, that led to this de-escalation agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, regional actors were at the core. Regional actors started the momentum and built the momentum and asked the help of an external power to sort of consolidate this and come to an agreement. In the case of the Abraham Accords, I think the issue, with all the nuances applied, the thing is slightly different. I think, here in that case, you have an external power, the United States, and in particular the Trump administration, really pushing for this, and regional countries sort of accepting and building upon the input of an external actor. So this is something, again, different, which doesn't mean that one is stronger than the other, one process is stronger than the other, but I think gives sort of, a broader and comprehensive picture of what we are witnessing in the region these days. So I think I'll stop there. I'm very happy to, answer question in the Q&A and get more deep into some of the things I've just touched. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jacopo, and thank you to both of you for setting the scene. I mean, this was a fascinating overview of the evolution, not just of Iran's foreign policy, but the region, as you said, and a lot of your pictures capture this new environment. As a result, we're already receiving a lot of questions. We'll have a lot of topics here, I'm sure, to unpack. Let me start with a question from my colleague Aisha Al-Sarihi, who was asking about Yemen, because the Yemen war has been going on for 8 years now, and one of the major prospects or speculations around the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran was that this could lead to a breakthrough in Yemen. What is your take so far on the implications of that agreement for the war in Yemen? Should we start maybe with Asif?
Sure. Thank you, John-Luc. See, this trilateral agreement, it very clearly has set out, the timeline. That was initially, the timeline was given for restoration of diplomatic ties. Okay, so for the two powers that have been at war, initially not in Yemen but at other spectrums, so it will take time. So I think what they have done is to try and create a mechanism where the two parties come and on a regular basis, and they can sort out their differences. So I think this is how they're approaching. So the first step has happened. Now they have restored the diplomatic ties. We have been hearing about the exchange of the ambassadors, the two leaders or their deputies have been meeting at various other platforms. So this mechanism has started. Now, as far as Yemen is concerned, a lot of it will depend upon reconciling with the two different factions also. So the way we see that these two major powers had got a platform where the two are talking. So it's not just that there's something, through it, a string that the two powers are critically controlling. No, they do have influence on two different factions. So they will have to do a lot of maneuvering in terms of bringing in alignment or in some kind of reconciliation between these two warring factions within Yemen. Okay. So it's like a double down approach. So of course that will take time. But what I see here is that a great amount of optimism can be had on this issue, that of course it will be resolved unless there is some dramatic development happens in terms of relationship between these two factions within Yemen, as well as in the regional term between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Jacopo?
Yeah, well, I think as if Basil said what I had in my mind. So, but just to reiterate the point, the situation in Yemen, I think I'm not an expert myself of Yemen and the war in Yemen, but I think one of the mistakes that some of the analysts and comments I've read in the past have done is that treating this war as simply just as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, and so on. When of course the proxy dimension is there, is important, is relevant, but at the same time there's a very local dimension, and this is something where Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, and all the external actors that are involved in this have somehow limited control upon. So it's obvious that, for example, for Iran, stopping sending weapons to the Houthis will certainly reduce the ability of the rebel group to pursue attacks and so on. But at the same time, it's very important, and I think both Saudi and Iranian policymakers have this quite clear in mind, that the agency of local actors is there. And the influence that the sort of the proxy can have on or the leader can have on proxy is somehow limited. So this is kind of important. I share with the some sort of optimism, but at the same time, I think Yemen will be the major test for this agreement to remain in place and bear fruits. So in the long term, more than looking at naval tensions in the Gulf, I'd look at what happened in Yemen. If things in Yemen holds, or if something there's a sort of escalation, but both Iran and Saudi Arabia stick to the idea that this was not our responsibility as this local dimension of the conflict, and we can continue our de-escalation process. This will have positive, or will not impact much the agreement. At the same time, again, this is where the real game is played.
Thank you for both of you for your response. I have another question on the prospects of China's involvement beyond that agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And the question relates to the way China could play a role in improving relations between Israel and the Arab states and possibly Iran. So in a way, another Abraham Accords, but led this time by Beijing. So do you think that China could be interested and could play that role? I suggest we start with Jacopo this time for the response.
Well, that's an interesting question, and the sort of one of those $1 million question, in a sense that personally, I don't think China can do much, especially when it comes to Iran and and Israel. Or broadly when it comes, not broadly, but in another realm when it comes to Israel and Palestine, for example. So we had the news that China had this proposal about, peace between Israel and Palestine and so on. But from my perspective, first of all, this was not new. China has long talked about this, but this is mostly virtue signaling, if you want to put it like that, in a sense that, and here is the big difference between China mediating between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and China mediating between Iran and Israel, or Israel and Palestine. And the difference is that, as we said before, in the case of Iran and Saudi Arabia, both rivals had the will to come to some sort of agreement. But this is not the case between Israel and Palestine at the moment. It's hardly the case between Israel and Iran. So China will probably do a lot of victory signaling, will probably, repeat its classic lines that they want regional countries to be responsible. They will support any de-escalation, that there should be, peace in the region and so on. But practically, I don't see China spending diplomatic energy, diplomatic resources for something that is practically impossible at the moment. So no, I don't see China brokering a deal between Iran, Israel, or Israel and Palestine. Now, China can, somehow be involved in a sort of Saudi Israel accord, Saudi-Israel-Habram accord. Right now, it seems that the United States are still at the brokering external power of this, but that is a case where China would certainly, be happy to jump on board if it's allowed to do that.
Thank you very much, Asif. Do you agree with this rather cautious view on the Chinese involvement in Israel-Arab rapprochement?
My answer, of course, I agree with Dr. Sheeta. Just to top it on and maybe generalize it, if we are looking on the question of the Chinese involvement in Arab-Israeli conflict, we will see as to what is the benefit out of it, or number one. Number two, if that problem is not resolved, what is China losing out of it? So if the conflict persists and China loses strategically, economically, it will jump its head, it's jumping. And if it sees that by the way of bringing them together, resolving the conflict, it reaps grand economic benefits, it will jump in. Otherwise, it will not. So this is my answer.
Thank you. I have a question which is quite similar in the spirit, which relates to the role China can play on the nuclear issue. And you mentioned how much the nuclear issue will remain a major one at the heart of the regional rivalries. And do you think that China could be able to mediate an agreement such as a new JCPOA or a new nuclear deal, just like the one that the Obama administration had been able to broker back in 2015? So do you think that China could replace the US on that? Let's turn this time again to Asif.
Sure, thank you so much. So for answering this question, we'll have to ask ourselves first, if the nuclear deal, the JCPOA is not being revived, whose decision is it? Is it the American decision or the Iranian decision? In my view, it is the Iranian decision. Okay, Iran has not been ready to revive the nuclear deal. Donald Trump had been working hard. Iran said no. Joe Biden gave some proposal. Iran said no. It has very specific requirement that there should be a guarantee that the US will not pull out of it. Number one. Number two is that it should get the measurable economic benefit. Now, eventually, whatever the reason is the decision of Iran. Now, if again, China sees that there is a benefit out of the resolution of this problem, it can convince Iran to come on the table and resolve it. It's very easy. Now, is it in the benefit of China? Now you see, get into the global politics of it. What has been the repercussion of sanctions on Iran? You know, there are a lot of hardships that the sanctioned country has to face, and it has to come out of the bottleneck by creating various mechanisms. China has started feeling the heat, the same heat of global powerhouse United States sanctioning this country. So it has to also devise the same kind of tools and techniques. So they are basically working in conjunction with Iran to actually defeat that whole sanctions regime. So yeah, number one, it can resolve this problem. Number two, it is not in its immediate benefit to resolve this problem. So China would rather go to the other way or to reap the benefit out of developing these tools and techniques. It is happening in the currency sector. I won't get into much of the detail, but yes, this has been my answer.
Jacopo?
Yeah, well, I think I broadly agree with Asif. I think, you know, when it comes to Iran nuclear program and the JCPOA and so on, China has always been a sort of a follower, never a leader, although it was part of the, you know, the negotiation and so on. And there are various reasons for this. But just to reiterate what Asif said, you know, I think personally, I think China is broadly interested and see the values of a JCPOA in terms of non-proliferation and so on. So that's not the matter. But and I like, you know, a colleague once defined China as a sort of quintessentially self-interest great power. And look, if you look back at the past 4 years, or 5 years since Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA, the fact that Iran was hedging towards you know, being capable to build a nuclear bomb and so on, at the end of the day, had little impact on China's expansion in the region, in the Persian Gulf, to the point that probably the past 5 years have been the most successful for China in building ties and expanding economic and financial presence in the region, in attracting regional country towards itself. So one could simply ask, and probably I'm saying again what Asif just said, simply ask, is this really convenient for China? Because, of course, you know, taking a leadership role in reviving the JCPOA, again, will cost a lot of diplomatic energy, a lot of backlashes, a lot of issues, a lot of contrast with regional countries. Is this convenient for China? I don't think so.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you now a question which is on a country which has not been covered much. I mean, we discussed a lot about China's involvement behind the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But our audience was also wondering about the role of Oman. Oman, this Gulf state that has a traditionally very neutral policy. So could you tell us about the involvement of Oman behind or prior to the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Jacopo, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I'll be very, very, very general. As you were saying, Jean-Luc, Oman has always been a key diplomatic actor in the region, and this was true, for example, as we just mentioned during the nuclear negotiation. It's still true because Oman always plays a role between the United States and Iran. And Oman was one of the countries that really pushed for and mediated the regional dialogue after 2021. Now, the interesting thing I would say that it's notable that Oman was there, but was probably not the leader of that. And maybe Asif has more insights on this with me. At that point, the leader was Iraq. And this is quite interesting because Iraq is certainly more let's say a troubled country than Oman, but it's also a country where the Iranian influence is stronger and more present in the everyday political life. but Oman was there. I think, in all this process, and even in the past few weeks with last development, it's been clearer than ever that every sort of diplomatic process that involves Gulf countries and Iran has Oman as a sort of neutral mediator. And this was, I think, particularly interesting because, of course, there was a change in the leadership of the country a couple of years ago, and so this was sort of, I remember people, being worried that Oman could lose some of his, diplomatic courage and activity. But I think, again, Oman is there, has been part of the negotiation. And again, I think Oman is the key diplomatic actor in the Gulf when it comes to Iran, especially. I'll leave to Asif, which probably has more insights than me on this.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, talking diplomatically, what has been Oman's position? It provides good offices. It is treated as neutral country. It is seen as an unprejudiced. So it provides a very good office in diplomatic terms for major powers. Much like Singapore has provided good offices between North Korea and United States. We have seen that, right? It's exactly tantamount to that. Because Singapore is also seen as a neutral country, and so what is said as the impartial mediator, that tag is there on Oman. So one great fruit of this tag we have seen in terms of on 14th of July 2015, when the nuclear deal JCPOA was agreed. For that, before that, a lot of secret meetings happened between United States officials and Iran. It was Oman which played the key role between these world leaders. It was very effective. But now when we and that was like these are two countries are on a deadlock. Right? They are running short of diplomatic good officers because they do not talk to each other. That was Oman very crucial. Now, when it comes to neighbor or slightly extended neighbor countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, who have some very direct conflicting interests, which is quite evident. So there, it's not just the question of good officers. There, the mediator also needs to have some kind of wherewithal, which can actually impact the outcome of some situation through its actions or inactions. So of course, in that term, China was a better player. So of course, China became a mediator in that sense. But yes, Oman has its role there in the Gulf, which is highly respected. So in future, we really don't know in terms of other major issues what all countries, their leaderships are talking. It will continue to be seen as an impartial mediator.
Thank you very much, Asif. Next question is from our colleague, Clemens Shea at the Middle East Institute, who's asking about Iran's full membership to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I believe, Jacopo, you also mentioned the most recent announcement today of Iran and Saudi Arabia possibly becoming members of the BRICS. I mean, in your views, for both of you, why do we see these new rapprochement between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and these regional organizations or multilateral arrangements such as the BRICS? I mean, what are the benefits that they gain from these partnerships? Shall we start this time with Asif?
Dr. Shita has done his PhD on this issue. I think I'll be very delighted if he could talk about this issue and in great details. I would be really benefited. Thank you.
So, Jacopo, floor is yours right away. Yeah, too kind, Asif, too kind. Well, I'll try to be, very, very clear and probably, against some of the hype that this kind of news generate. I think, what we are witnessing, broadly speaking, as I was saying in my presentation, in the Gulf is very interesting because, of course, it's quite clear that all this shall we call them Global South organization, Eurasian organization, a non-Western organization, whatever we will call them, are getting and gaining constantly momentum in the Gulf. In a region that in the past has not particularly been, interest in this sort of organization, or at least, has been far less interested in what it is now. In that sense, interestingly enough, and here I think Asif can say something more, but Iran has been at the forefront, and has been at the forefront of this look east, to use a word that has entered Iranian foreign policy quite heavily in the past 2 decades, has been at the forefront of this tendency to look east. And for Iran, the news of obtaining the full membership in the SCO is excellent political news. This has to be said. Is an important victory, is an important win for the Raisi administration. The political message is clear. Iran is not isolated. The United States can try to isolate Iran through sanction, but politically, Iran is not an isolated country. It's a country that has entered in this sort of rampant Eurasian organization, an organization where Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, and so on, and many other countries want to join. Iran is entering the BRICS, which is another, organization that has been dormant or sleepy for 2 decades or something like that, and now is back. Again, the context of the changing global geopolitics with Russian invasion of Ukraine is gaining new traction. So Iran is at the forefront of this, political momentum. Now, specifically on Iran, the problem is big win politically, but beyond that, what is it? What we have? I think not much. Iran remains in a troubled economic position. With secondary sanction in place, Iran can't do much. With foreign policy that, as Asif, I agree with him, that is basically rejecting any U.S. proposal to come back to the JCPOA or a nuclear agreement. Iran can have little economic and financial benefit from joining this organization. Yes, again, a lot of political score for the Raisi administration, a lot to show the world, but in terms of practical benefits, it's very limited. And so that's why I have mixed feelings about sort of the success of Iran foreign policy in terms of joining this organization. But certainly, and I'll leave to Asif for more comments. Again, I want to highlight that what is interesting is that Gulf countries, not just Iran, but Gulf countries are increasingly acting in this as a sort of multi-aligned foreign policy, where they are very interested in building ties with everyone, including China, in not being left out from what might be or not be the next, global order, an Eurasian Chinese global order. I don't think they necessarily believe China will reshape the international system. They do not certainly believe that the United States will be kicked out of this, but they do not want to be left out. They want to have a foot in this sort of emerging Eurasian international system. So this is very interesting and should not be diminished or we should have a constant look at this trend.
Thank you very much. Asif, would you like to add anything?
I just wish to say thank you so much. It was really great to know that.
Let me ask one final question, which is not about China or let's say the external powers, but more the regional dynamics, and it's about the Israel-Iran conflict. And the question relates to how you see this conflict evolving, because what's striking is that in the past 2-3 years, we talked a lot about reconciliation and the fact that Arab states are getting closer or normalizing their relations with Israel. And at the same time, you have this new warming up of the relations between Iran and Arab states. But when you look at the Israel-Iran relations, things are not de-escalating. It's actually intensifying in terms of the tensions, in terms of the frequency of operations, indirect operations of Israel targeting Iran in Syria, for instance. So how do you see that evolving? I mean, are you optimist or pessimist on the evolution of Israel-Iran tensions? Let me turn first to Asif, because I know you've been thinking a lot about this topic.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. Yeah, it's a crucial issue, and again, it is directly linked to the global power also, and also the domestic, environment. Because as I said, countries have their intrinsic strength and their relative strength. So Iran has its own intrinsic strength on which it is fighting with Israel. Israel has, apart from its intrinsic relative strength, derived from the United States. So what was true about Saudi Arabia, the same would be true about Israel also. Okay. Now, a lot of people talk about Israel's nuclear arsenal, which works as a deterrent. But from that perspective, or in that perspective, we will have to look at Iran's growing relationship with the two other P5 states, that is Russia and China. But we must remember that Iran has had agreement with Russia, 20 years agreement, with China, 25 years agreement, the detail of which we do not know. So let's not discount anything. Okay. So the nuclear deterrent that Israel has, how much of it will be effective in the face of Iran's closeness with two P5 states, where the two leaders' words are the rules of the game, They do not need to go through their parliament, things like that. So, of course, when it comes to the standoff between these two countries, I mean, Israel would not stand a chance, in front of Iran. This is what I say. Now, is there any benefit out of diffusing this conflict? Both countries are benefited out of this country. Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, what we Westerners say regime, is been thriving on the enmity with Israel, So why would it want to do away with this conflict, which is giving the regime legitimacy for its sustenance? Now, similarly, Israel, whatever its intention, we all know, it is actually a very big power to unite the whole country against a common threat. So basically, what I see is that Iran and Israel sustaining each other. That has been the case. Now, in simple terms, in future, what will be the fate of this relationship will entirely depend upon United States, the degree of United States blessing that will be there or not there on Israel. Okay, and I wouldn't get much into the detail of it, but I think this is where I will stop.
Thank you very much. Jacopo, would you like to add something?
Well, look, very quickly. I was like, until 6 months, 1 year ago, I was quite pessimistic about the situation between Iran and Israel, especially given, the return to power of Netanyahu, the Iran's nuclear escalation, everything at some point seemed to point towards, sort of a terrible escalation and uncontrolled escalation. I think, what we're witnessing with the Saudi-Iran agreement, with Iran, sort of normalizing relationship with other Arab countries, makes me a little bit more optimistic, in the sense that, it's quite clear that the message that especially Arab countries in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and so on, are sending to Israel and Netanyahu is that they have no appetite for war with Iran. Which basically means that, and I think, the United States, to an extent, or the Biden administration has pretty much said the same, yes, deterrence, yes, showing strength against Iran. We have the news of Marines sent on ships in the Gulf and so on. But there's no appetite for war with Iran in the region, and sort of the underlying message is that Israel will have to go alone if they want to do something, escalate. And this makes me optimistic. I don't think I'm not a big fan of Bibi Netanyahu, to put it bluntly, but I don't think it's that crazy to go on something like that. The point is, again, I don't see, and probably Sif is right with this. I don't see any prospect of reconciliation. So, Cold War or something like that will be there, and obviously the possibility of escalation is always there and will remain there. So I'm optimistic, but not completely, happy or again, not completely optimistic, but neither pessimistic. Let's say, sort of middle way.
Thank you very much. This is on this word of cautious optimism, let's say, that we will stop. Thank you very much, Jacopo, for joining us. Thank you, Asif, as well. It was a great exchange. Thank you also for our participants to join us for this lecture. We'll meet again next week in a hybrid format, meaning that we'll be in the auditorium of the Middle East Institute on NUS campus, as well as on Zoom. Next week, we'll be talking about Israel and Turkey, so following on the regional powers, the foreign policies of the Middle East countries. Thank you to everyone, and have a great day or great evening, depending on where you are. Thank you all.